Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. With a new year setting in, most of us want to plan out our goals, look forward to a high performance, and get ready to do our best form of work by either creating or shipping something live. As much as all the enthusiasm is intact, we're sure that we'd move past some challenges, especially with decision making, doing the right impactful activities, and dealing with a lot of confusions and uncertainties. As founders and builders, channelizing our thoughts and plans become very important here because it's what leads us to looking to achieve what we really want to. Let's say hello to Dr. Julie Gurner, who's all set to help us navigate our decisions, take a balanced mindset, and stay true to our goals. She's a doctor of psychology and executive performance coach with nearly a decade of experience working with some of the world's top tech and finance executives and teams. And she's somebody that I personally look up to and have been following her on Twitter for a long time now. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Let's just get started. So, from getting a doctorate in psychology to being a product advisor and executive performance coach now in tech, how did you find your niche and what made you choose tech?
That's a really interesting question. When I first started out in my education, technology wasn't as, big as it is today. It wasn't something that people pursued quite as much. But like everyone else, and especially those in tech, I like things that move fast and have great impact. And so, psychology as pursued traditionally is fairly, you go into academics, you go into practice, you work in various settings. And so, from a psychology angle, I was asked to advise on, products and things like this around cognitive load, around some of the more technical aspects in psychology. And while I was doing that for a particular product, one of the venture capitalists who worked for a firm that was funding it had some challenges with a portfolio company founder. And so, he had received a very large round of funding and then began to become paralyzed in making decisions. And he's like, I genuinely do not know anyone else in psychology. Can you just speak with this person? So I went and spoke with this person. The problem was very clear to me. It was a few meetings from that point. He got back on track and it just felt so natural. It felt like I was able to use these talents and understanding how humans function and be able to bring it to individuals who are high performing, healthy people who, sometimes have periods of being stuck and also have periods where, maybe they're not operating at their best. So, having this brief period of kind of doing work with this one person really kicked off an entirely new area of my career. From that point forward, I began to take on just kind of smaller clients at first and then, kind of scaling up. And that's really my entrance into the world. I became utterly addicted, but I think that's probably how many people get into tech. So in that way, it's probably not an unusual story.
Absolutely. And you are right about how amusing it is for each of us to get into tech with a unique kind of a story. And what I really like about it in your case is how it kind of opened up a path that is very new to yourself when you first discovered or rather chanced upon it. And often psychology has this phase where people just look at it more from the clinical or the medical sciences part of it, where it's never looked beyond that. And often it's only now that people are starting to talk about coaching and a lot of this mentoring and leadership coaching for people in tech. So I'm glad that you got to do it even before it was a thing, like even before it was really brought into a very corporate-y culture. But, you kind of discovered that you could help founders and especially with cognitive skills like decision making, which, I'm like looking forward to discuss with you more on the show now.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that people have boxed psychology into this area where it's only going from making people who are ill to making them well.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that there is so much research out there about how humans function best, how we perform best, and that we can really use to get those individuals who are operating very well, who are very healthy, and just make these small adjustments that help them operate in a space that is far beyond kind of how they even think about themselves. We all are imperfect creatures. So, we may do things that sometimes like hold ourselves back. And so it's really my job most of the time, not to fix particular problems, but to realize where people are holding themselves back. One of the things I realize with founders is if I speak with them, whether it's a new founder or somebody who's doing incredibly well, is that each and every person, if you ask them, knows deep down that they could be performing better. They could be more than where they're at right now. And so my job for a lot of these individuals is to really get them to that point. And, if they already knew how to do that, they would be there. So they trust me, I think, with that to even somebody who's running a company who, are hundreds of millions of dollars, they know that they could be more than where they're at. If they can build a company that's a few $100 million, they can build $1 billion company, right? So everybody understands that they have this potential inside them. And I think a lot of people just are not really aware of how to tap it.
Yeah, they've like already taken the first step in terms of kickstarting something, and they
Right.
just need that push. And in terms of like letting themselves not be in their own way, I guess, like how you put it.
Yeah, that's
So
perfect. Wonderful way to put it.
yeah. So just like you said, just giving them a push and getting to the fundamental ways of how they think and how they can act in a certain way to get to their path. So yeah, that really makes sense. And yeah, I think talking to founders is one line of it. But I know that you started your early career. You used to work with mental health units and a protective custody space at a max security prison. So for me, when I knew about that, I was like, oh wow, like what kind of a pattern would it be to work with folks over there? And do you think still applies to a lot of us working in tech? Like how similar or different do you see these patterns? And like when you look just back at what you've done?
That is such an interesting question. I think that some of the things that I've discovered is you have to be able to sit in a room with anyone, right?
Mm.
And that people who are founders operate at the extremes. In that way, we are, people who are founders are outliers. And outliers can be of various sorts, right? People who don't fit the mold, for better or for worse. And so being able to sit in a room with anyone, to have these conversations, to understand, I think, extremes in personality, extremes in drive, extremes in how they function and operate. I think that if you're looking for someone who fits kind of a normal mold, founders tend not to do that, right? I mean, they work insane hours. They have obsessions about the products and things that they build. And you have to understand that there's a normal range there, right? I mean, if you talk to, sometimes people, they talk with their parents and they say, I'm spending 16 hours a day on this. And it sounds, quite extreme. So being able to sit with anyone, being able to understand the extremes, and I think being all right, finding a space in those extremes for people to thrive is probably the overlap. But aside from that, I always hope that founders use their powers for good and not for evil, as we've seen some do, right? I mean, in the media and in the press. So those are the types of overlaps you don't want.
Right. Yeah, I think taking the good part more like in terms of the extremism. So that's like a very interesting concept to think about because, like you just put it, we are kind of obsessed in our own ways. Like we want things to happen in a certain form, and often, like as much as we think that founders are people who can, like, even for the matter, even builders, like folks who just take up a project, even though they can navigate different paths, like they can try to experiment, they can try to go and like learn from their failures. Often we have our obsessions where like we just like get put out because we're just too extreme there. We're like, oh, things didn't work my way. So it's like my way or highway kind of a situation where you're like, yeah, it just didn't work. So like, what am I supposed to do now? So yeah, I think.
And I think about it even in the early journey, right? I mean, you have someone who could easily just go and work a traditional job. They could go and earn a regular salary with regular income. And instead, they decide to take a path which has a very small statistical rate of success. And that along the way may be given tens of millions of dollars. I mean, it's an extreme path. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that because we're so in the ecosystem. And then you go and you talk to somebody who isn't in the startup world, and all of these things sound very extreme, and so it's, you ask people to take a bet on you. Oftentimes, in the early stages of hiring, and teams will be, working together. I know of some teams that have lived together, so, in the same apartment. So, I mean, there are things that, make it seem very, very different from how the average person may start their path or their career.
Yeah, yeah. And bringing back one of the important points that you made about being able to sit with somebody in the room, like in most often cases when we work on something, like whether it's something that we're building or something that we're thinking, we are just often put alone with our thoughts. So there's like a lot of times that, we just talk to ourselves. We just have to get comfortable about being with ourselves in that room or in any open space and still like just focus on ourselves, like just look at are we doing the right thing, or like are we like just looking at doing something for the good or like for bad, and there's like a lot of self introspection going on. So that's like a very uncanny observation, I would say, in terms of being alone with yourself, even though like you're just surrounded by a lot of people around, you're still like just looking at yourself and your own thoughts and you're playing around with it.
Good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we're talking about founders having to just like focus a lot on their own self and like how the way they think and all of that, most founders love to experiment and they like just tinker their paths or their ideas, especially when in early stage. So this becomes like a good habit, but often when they see that something works out for them, like there's like a certain metric that's worked out for them, or like there's a certain path that they think is working good for them, eventually it becomes it just comes in their own path and hinders them, right? Like it becomes like an old pattern or a habit that's like very hard to break. So how do you consistently put growth and learning into focus if your tried and tested habits are going to be like in conjunction with where you want to grow towards?
Right. I'm a really big fan of always kind of doubling down on your strengths. So if something is working, you ride that. I mean, you should always be kind of like leaning into that and riding that. But when you're talking a little bit about old patterns and habits, I try to think about it as, founders need to be in a mental space of constant evolution, right? I mean, that when we think about even evolution of Darwin, right? It's not the strongest of the species or even the smartest that survive. It's the most adaptable to change. So you always want to be the animal that is, 2 steps ahead in your own evolution. You want to be the thing that is kind of out front. I tell founders that if you look at where you are right now, especially in early stage, and then you look at where you're at in 6 months, those people should be different, right? You should have, I mean, your company is at a different place. The responsibilities that you have are probably changing and shifting. The things that you're taking on are a little bit different. The products are giving you different information. So, you have to always be willing to be open and adaptable. That in and of itself is sometimes very hard because founders are very, they're very strong-willed, they're very strong personalities sometimes, even if they're quiet or they're more extroverted, still they have a specific way they want things to happen. And as you've said, the tendency to tinker and to kind of mess around with things in the early days, you have to be cautious not to develop kind of a shiny object syndrome where, you're looking around and you see, oh, well, maybe I should be doing this, or maybe I should be doing that. But if you're able to just see your path is to be focused on the things that work, focused on your vision of what you want to happen, being very, very drilled down on the things that are working for you, you really can pull off quite a bit. So that's kind of how I think about it. Always be a work in progress, because as you go through the various stages of your company, you will need to be a different type of leader, and it will demand different things of you as you go on your path.
Right. Yeah. That's very interesting to think about. And it's also like the version of you keeps changing with time, when you just kind of like over, like, you look back at yourself and you're like, okay, yeah, I've just come past this version of me. And then like with the time that I'm in, this demands like more skills or like more kind of traits that I have to outperform to just grow out of that old sense. So yeah, I think that really makes sense. And I sort of agree with you there in terms of doubling down on your strengths. And like the whole the reason that I asked the question is also because when you double down on your strengths, like when you forget the adaptability part of it, then you kind of like just keep doubling on your strengths, but you just don't have this new version of you to add on to whatever you double down on. So yeah.
No, it's a great point. And I think too, as you rise and you're kind of putting energy into your strengths, your company grows, you're able to kind
Mhm.
of outsource some of your weaknesses to people who have them as strengths, right? So,
Yes.
if you are not somebody who's particularly, like, a lot of times, this is a common pattern that I find, is that founders are really good at starting things off, but they're often
Mm.
not good finishers. So,
Yeah.
taking it through the entire pathway. So finding someone who is, that you can start something off on, have a great idea around, and then hand it off so that it gets
Mhm.
implemented to, someone else who's going to take that and really start to run with it. That's a privilege you get as you grow, more and more, but you may not have
Yeah.
at the beginning.
That's true. That's true. Like you often start something on your own, but like you said, it reminds me of how you bring in your inner circle of support system. And then you also like, I think most often I've seen it in my circles as well, where founders who just start their journey alone tend to like eventually attract folks who are like-minded and sort of meet your
Yeah.
co-founders also on the same journey. And then there's like this whole balanced unit that's there to build the product. So yeah, that really makes sense. Awesome. So, one of the other things, Julie, that I want to ask you is, when you work in tech, it's often a lot of competition, right? Like whether it's just like founders discovering there's something, um, and somebody is building out there that's just so equivalent to what they're doing, or whether it's
Mhm.
just competing with people, like not just products, but just competing with people and sort of having this constant new version of self being compared to another, let's say, a person who's just on the very similar path as them. So how do you deal with this kind of a competition? And like, since you work with a lot of clients across, what do you suggest in general when people come to you with, hey, I see this person, same path, same set of traits, but I see them somewhere else. But whereas, I'm somewhere else. So how do I balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, comparison, they say it is the thief of joy. It is also the thief of progress, right? So,
Yeah.
when you focus on your competitors, I think that there is a healthy focus where you understand what they're doing, where their products are at, and kind of
Mm.
that area where you're looking at, the brass tacks and kind of the bottom line of, the features that they are building, the product that they have. After you know that information, that is the time to kind of stop focusing on anyone else but yourself. You want to make sure that you are really kind of putting on blinders, putting your head down, and doing the work you need to do to make yourself better, to kind of move your product forward, to move your company forward. Founders who spend too much time looking around or at their competition, it's easy to get very obsessed. What are they doing? What are
Mm.
they talking about? What are they doing on social media? What are they speaking at? It's oftentimes it ends up distracting you more than it does help you. So knowing more about the competition, sometimes it can be a blessing and a curse. You want to know what they're up to, what they're doing, but
Yeah.
you don't want to hyper focus on them. And it's an easy thing to say. Sometimes it's harder to do, but it's incredibly important if you want to push progress. So
Mm.
that's I guess that's what I'd recommend, is to make it very limited, get the information you need, and kind of duck out of doing those types of things.
Right. Yeah. Like, do you generally suggest some like, let's say, everyday practices in general? Like, let's say you said like cut it down. So like, do you have any general practices for founders? Like, do these things follow this kind of a cycle, and like you can keep this at check?
I think about with respect to focusing on other people. I think what I always think about when I think about behaviors. I think, like, what is the function, right? What is the
Hmm.
purpose? Why are you paying attention to this person? If it's because, oh, I really love how they run their social media, fine. Get analysis around how they run their social media. Get out. If it's about their product, then get the information you need about their
Right.
product. Get out. So, like, know the function of why you're focusing on them, because if you don't, that's where it gets very kind of out of control. It can get
Hmm.
very vague, and it becomes bigger than it needs to be. So when you find yourself functioning on or focusing on anyone else, ask yourself, what's the function? If there is no function, get away from that. So I think that's where I would direct someone, and
Yeah.
how I would ask them to function.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And like just as how you would find the purpose of what you're building for, I think just taking a moment to understand why do you think you're just like focusing on this person or this particular thing that's out there, and what are you really deriving out of it? I think that's a good question to ask, even if you're not like too focused on other people. I think it's a great question to ask about anything that you're interested in, like even mildly interested in. Like just take a minute back to say like, oh, what of this interests me, and why do I just like gravitate towards it? And yeah, that's a
That's a
good
great point.
question. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, cool. The next part of it is I love how you once tweeted about this quote, and I kind of always go back to it whenever I think about other things that are very related to this concept, which is like you say you can't win the game that you're not willing to play. And often when I just think about showing up to certain circumstances, whether it's like showing up to activities or like showing up to this like new idea that just comes to me, I'm like, do I have to start now? Do I have to start later? I often go back to this line, which is like, you just can't win the game that you're not willing to play. So, what ways do you think someone should just get their foot up and ready to play, especially when you have like a lot of challenges around it? And, founders, as builders, founders, or like folks working in tech, I may have certain set of steps that work out for me. You might have some steps. So, in general,
True.
how do you usually say somebody should just show up, especially when you have a lot of challenges with everyday cycles?
I think that, I mean, this is about really focusing on the outcomes that you want, right? If you want, for example, you started this podcast, there's an outcome that I bet that you have in mind for this podcast, whether it's reach or it's, whatever it happens to be. I think it's fantastic, but that's why we engage in the things that we do. Like we spend time, even in our relationships, we spend time with our partner or our boyfriend or girlfriend or whomever, because we want to have a good quality relationship. We want a certain outcome from that. So in our companies, there is no way to get a specific outcome if you're not putting yourself in kind of the position to get it. To kind of finish out that quote, when you say you can't win the game that you aren't willing to play, realize that everyone wins the prizes of the games they do play. So if you are not doing anything, well, the outcomes aren't going to be great. If you end up putting yourself out there and just giving it a shot, that's when you have the ability and the possibility of kind of winning that next prize. Like you put yourself out there and start a company. That's when you have the ability to actually get that maybe seed round of funding. You put yourself out there to actually try to develop that tool. That's when you have the potential of, having a tool that is completely new in the marketplace. But you can never have that if you never start the venture, right? So that's kind of really the kind of the basics of it, is that, and it even gets into company operations. So if you don't spend any time in strategy, don't expect that you're going to have a great strategy forward. If you want things to be successful, you have to look at where you're spending your time and what you're paying attention to. So if you're spending your time, developing fantastic dialogue in a podcast, then you're going to have a good dialogue. But if you just are like, well, I'm just going to show up and hopefully things go well, it may not go quite as well as you hope. And that is true in companies. It's true with your personal time. It's true with your priorities. If you want anything to go well, you've got to give it time and attention. Otherwise, you're not going to win those the things that you think or hope that you'll win.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And it's also about how much you're willing to like take that step forward, especially when
Good point.
like it's that people often quote exercise as an example. It's like, yeah, you just have exercise as one of your goals, but if you're just not willing to wake up in the morning, not willing to take the first 2 steps, it's just not going to happen. Like you just have to sit and think about it as it's just a thought. And so yeah, like I think like you just put through all of these fall into a very similar example of outcome. Like what are you really looking at? And you just want to go there. You just have to be there. You just have to be willing to show up. So that's
I think
a
your
very
example of exercise is perfect. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I wish I had X. I wish I could run a 5K, or I wish I could, have a certain body. But like, it's a great example of that. You can't win the game you aren't willing to play, because if you aren't willing to go to the gym, that body isn't happening. So you do, like, there are very concrete outcomes to the actions that we take. But it's a fantastic example.
Thank you. And the other similarity that I found with what you were just talking about is we say that it's kind of easy to give into things, like just start something, but not really look through the progress. Just focus on starting new things and like the new shiny object syndrome kind of a thing. At the
Mhm.
same time, there's also like we have to show up, we have to start. So it's a like a very hard balance to know when to start and when not to start, and like just take a step back and say, okay, so here's I would commit to something that I start. So it's not just about showing up, but I think it's like how you put it, like being we just willing to show up and also like commit to it as you go towards your outcome. Because you can just start a lot of things and like, just looping back to what we said before, just make all of those as shiny object syndrome and just not complete anything, but just have like multiple progresses taking you like to nothing, to no place. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think to follow up on that, realize that when you go out there and you have your wonderful ideas, I mean, a
Mm,
lot of people have great ideas. I mean, that's not unique and that's not special, but what's special is bringing them into existence. And that takes
mm,
consistency, it takes, dedication, it takes commitment. Those are the things that make it special. If you ask anyone, even in your family, go home today and ask people questions and say, hey, what are some great ideas you have? And they'll say, oh, I think it would be a great idea if we had flying cars, but are they making flying cars? That person is going to
yeah.
have an impact. So like there are a lot of, I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but even, the small things in our lives, everybody has ideas, but what is the magic of founders is that the successful ones bring these things to life. And that
Yeah.
requires a lot behind the scenes that people don't like to talk about.
Definitely, definitely. I think I would also add on another point to this, which like when you brought this example, it brought the story to my mind that especially with podcasts as an example, a lot of them would have this idea to, let's say, write something, and you own a Substack publication as well. So a lot of people just think about writing a newsletter or starting a podcast, but they just
Right.
get stuck in the nitty gritty of, okay, which kind of a device should I use? What kind of a mic should I buy? Or like, what kind of a tool that I should have to grammar check everything that I write. But that's not often the optics over there, right? The whole thing is the outcome. What kind of a value you want to bring to the table? So often when people ask me like, and rather for this as well, if I'm just going to like sit and think, my device is not right, or like my mic is not proper, I'm pretty sure that you just can't take that step forward. So it's just like how you said, put your outcome first, and like whatever challenge it is, just move past that and just put focus and outcome as your only goal to get forward.
Well, one of the things I think that you're absolutely right. And the point that you make that I hope that people get from what you've just said is that we can, if you want to find an excuse, you will find one. Like, oh, my mic isn't proper, or oh, I am not a great writer. You will always find an excuse to back out
Yeah.
of the things that are challenging to do. But if you put yourself forward, it's amazing how much you will refine and you will get better over time. Even with writing, as you mentioned with Substack, writing is something I love to do and it's something that I enjoy doing. I don't know if I'm the best writer. Writing is not my primary talent, I don't think. But at the same time, my goal was really that outcome is to convey, information. And
Mm.
if I can give founders a look, at how the best founders in the world operate or how some of the best in their business operate, I don't think they care if I make a grammar mistake. So I
Absolutely.
think if they can take a takeaway from that, similar to, conversations, it's you can't worry too much about some of those details. And I think when we get focused on those details that
Mm.
prevent us from moving forward, we prevent ourselves from some really amazing things in our future. So start now, start early, start before you're ready. All of those things are correct, even though
Yeah.
they're said 1,000 times.
Yeah. Speed to execution and like getting just started with that. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes. I think that's more like a goal for 2023. I would like put in, saying that it's not just for us, but anybody who's listening to this is more like speed and like just get started with this and like get your journey up and going and like figure things out on the way, but just start and like focus on the long term and focus on how do you want to commit to it.
Absolutely. And it takes courage, and because putting yourself out there means the possibility that no one is going to pay attention to it. No one is going to
Yeah.
subscribe. No one, but you know what? I can tell people a story, and I don't think I've ever shared this. So it's funny. When I was starting out, and a while ago, not that long ago, I don't think, it maybe
Mm.
like 5 years ago now, I thought it would be a great idea to have a Twitch stream where I
Oh,
would have people come in and ask me questions and I would answer them. And it did terribly. I mean, over a year, I stuck with it, right? For a year, I would show up and, kind of do this thing. And it just, what I realized is wasn't my audience, wasn't the right place, wasn't the
mm.
right format. And you know what? You learn. Who cares? You
Yeah.
can have success in various areas. Jeff Bezos, for example, proposed the Fire phone in Amazon, right?
Yes.
It absolutely bombed, didn't catch on, but no one cares, no one remembers. He's found some success in his life, and he's moved forward. So, if you keep going, you will have things that don't work out, but
Mm,
they will be overshadowed by the wonderful things that do. So it's
mm.
okay to have things every now and again that don't work out. Every great person has that happen. And if it happens to you, you're joining some really big legends out there.
Yes. And yeah, that's like well said. And there's so much in depth, thought to take from there in terms of like, just don't look at failures as your last step. And like the Amazon
Good
example was
point.
spot on because there's like, the world doesn't remember you, right? And it's good if they remember, but it's also like just don't do it only for the world. Like do it a lot for yourself as well. Just start because you want
Good
to do
point.
it, and not just because like you said. Like I'm so amazed, and I'm glad that you continued it for about a year, and you just don't now worry the fact that oh yeah, I just didn't have audience, but you're glad that you did that. So I think that's the kind of spirit that often we should end up taking from the stuff that we do, is that like you're glad because you did that. And even when nobody showed up or even when nobody subscribed to, you're still okay with having spent time to do that. So that's like a great thought, I would say. So thank you so much for sharing that story, Jill.
And then no worries, and it's funny because a lot of people start out having things that don't work and sometimes just don't work for a long time and then they work.
Mm.
Like Gary Vaynerchuk, who's very well known in
Yeah.
entrepreneurial circles. He started off doing wine videos and pairing it with candy, and no one watched for years. Like, I mean, he did literally for years, right? I mean, and now, he's an investor in Snapchat. He's had incredible success. I spoke with him for my blog a while ago, but like, an incredible guy doing incredible things
Mm.
and was making YouTube videos that no one watched for quite some time. So everyone has to start somewhere, and don't
Yeah.
expect that. I think sometimes we expect that we're going to do something and immediately it will be this overnight hit. And that's just
Yeah.
not how it happens. It's never how it happens.
Definitely. And that's also like reminding me of Gary Tan. He was just posting about how he
Yes.
once used to take photos and videos for Y Combinator. He just used to show up. He just showed up to volunteer and just take these photos. And now, like, just time passed, and look at him now. Now he's like heading the Y Combinator and trying to like invest in a lot of young founders out there. So that,
Yeah.
like, when just reading that write up was giving me a lot of energy with just the words he put in, because like that shows the power of showing up, because he never had that as like the long-term intent. It was just like being willing to just go there and just help people out there, and things sort of worked because he was there in the long game. He was just being there, trying to update himself, just giving back, and also learning a lot in the way. And like some of these examples we're just discussing about, I just hope a lot of them listening to it kind of get their energy out.
No, I completely agree. And it also follows up on what you'd said earlier about untraditional paths. I mean,
Mm.
talk about an untraditional path, starting out taking photos and now leading Y Combinator.
Yeah.
That's quite a path.
Yeah.
So
Meanwhile,
amazing.
also building his side projects. So I guess like a lot of
Yeah.
things on the plate, but just trying to prioritize and work towards what really matters to him. So I guess, yeah, that's like another clear example to show. So yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Amazing.
So we're talking about how founders can like hop onto a path that makes more sense in the long term, and like get them that energy and drive to go on. At the same time, I also want to just pick your brain on this concept about trusting the gut, because it's easy when, like, I've seen founders who say that, you know what, like I just go by data. For me, data is everything. And there's also like, set of people who talk about intuition and like trying to say, I'm not able to like put words to it, but it just comes to me. So just trusting the gut, however, when people talk about intuition, they just equate, like often people equate it with irrational motives. Like just trusting the gut means that you make quick decisions and you just don't have data to back you up. So could you talk about how founders can actually maximize their potential by trusting the gut and what it means to go by trusting the gut?
Interesting. Okay, so I think that this is a great question, and for me, when I think about trusting your gut, there's a couple of things that come up for me. One is
Mm,
that if somebody's listening to this right now, I want you to think about all the times that you didn't listen to your gut, but you were right. You had a bad impression about someone, you knew something
mm,
was going to happen that wasn't going to be good, and you knew it early, but you didn't do anything, right? Most
right.
of us have these examples that we can think of that we were like, I knew that was true, and you didn't do anything about it. I want you now to think about all the times you had an instinct and it was wrong. Those times are very few for most
Yeah.
people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, really hard to think of. So, a lot of times when people think about the gut, they do think about it as irrational. For
Mm,
me, I often think about it as, your gut is often a way of synthesizing information quickly. And that if you can close, there's ways of making decisions so that they're not irrational. And
mm,
by that, I mean, like, I always hope that people think about the decisions in terms, if they're going to move really fast, in terms of two things, reversibility and stakes. Like, if something is reversible, right? Like, how permanent or reversible is this decision? If it's like, hey, I want to try to build this new feature, that's not like the biggest deal. It's very reversible. It's not the biggest deal. I also look at it in terms of stakes. So, like, how high or low stakes is it? So
mm,
reversibility, stakes. If it's reversible and it's low stakes, move fast, right?
mm,
That means that, like, you can change it if you need to. It's not going to have the biggest impact on the world. If it's not reversible or like a permanent decision and high
mm,
stakes, you think about that, like getting married,
mm.
right? I mean, that's a that's a pretty permanent decision
Yeah.
and very high stakes with very high kind of back end. So, like, you think about that, you don't just use your gut and go, "Oh, I met this person, they're wonderful, let's get married." And maybe that works out for some in reality TV, but in the real world, it's probably not a great idea.
Yeah.
And even in reality TV, I'm not sure how well it works. Um, so with things like trusting your gut, I tell people to try as hard as they can to move quickly in things that are
Mm,
reversible and low stakes, because second guessing and hesitancy does two things. One is that it makes you move slower, but
mm,
two, the more hesitant you become, the more you lose confidence.
mm,
And people don't think about that. Like, if you thought about doing something and you didn't do it last year, and well, you kept thinking about it, but you didn't do it. And now you're looking at other people, as you've talked about, we look at others and they've done it and, oh, they're doing really well. And, oh, now I don't really want to start it because they're doing really great. Is
yeah.
there even space for me? The more hesitant you are, it's not only hurting your own progress, but it's hurting your own mindset because you start not to
Mm,
trust yourself. Um, you start to second guess yourself, right? And it harms you, it harms what you're building. I would prefer people to move quickly and to make some mistakes rather than not to move at all. And that's what ends
mm.
up happening if you don't take some chances with yourself. So I hope people dig in there, trust themselves a little bit, and see what happens. As long as it's reversible, as long as it's not permanent and does forever damage, I think that you'll be fine.
Awesome. So that's a great framework to even think about because you put like the rationality to what people often think very irrational to go by the gut. And I like how simple it is in terms of just like thinking how reversible it is and also like going by whether it has high or low stakes. Kind of reminds me of Jeff Bezos' one way, two-way door kind of a solution where you just
Right.
see that like, is it okay? And like, does this have repercussions? If not, then let me just go into it and experience and see what it brings forth to me. And if it has repercussions, sit back and think. So it's kind of very handy and like easy to follow. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Julie.
Very, very easy to follow, but I think, like, I guess in theory, but, when you have to do it in practice, it can really, kind of tap into how brave are you and how are you going to, like, you have this instinct. The thing about it is if you trust your gut and if you trust your instinct and you start to move on it and things work, you just
Hmm.
gain confidence because you start to
Yeah.
say that, like, I have good instincts here. I understand, that I see things in the market. I see things for potential that other people either don't see or that I do particularly well.
Mm.
And the more that you're able to kind of take those risks and they work out, the more confidence you gain, the more risks you take. And that's why oftentimes when you see founders that have gotten, to fairly successful stages, they seem like
Mm.
sometimes they have a fairly big ego, but in truth, they trust themselves very deeply because it's how they built a
Yeah.
company that got to a certain point. So it sometimes it is a bit of the, it does play into, who people become. Um,
Mm.
but I'm a big fan of people trusting their gut, and it starts early on.
Yeah. And yes, very much agree with that because it kind of shapes the kind of person you would behave, not just with yourself, but also with the folks around. Because if you just see yourself as being right most of the times, if that can like be worked up for the good, then great. But if that can like
Mhm.
make you a bit cocky and sort of like just oh well, like I know everything over here and give you that kind of a mindset, I think that's just going to like drag you towards a very different path. So,
True.
that's actually what I wanted to dig more deep on. In terms of founders need to be confident, yes, but that could
Yeah.
also be like how you put through the ego point of it. So, let's say on an everyday basis, you pitch to different people, like you pitch to investors, you pitch to customers, you kind of want them to join you in your journey, and you need various degrees of confidence and like various degrees of believing in yourself and also like making other people believe in you. So, how
Yeah.
to effectively play this confidence game without being too cocky or like without being too overconfident about your own success?
No, that's a great question. So I think that there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. I think that sometimes we confuse the two, but I do think that you have to be confident to be able to move forward in the path that you want to take. But all of the examples you gave, with investors, with employees, etc., you have to also have this realization that you need other people to succeed. So if you are pushing them away, if you know everything, why are you hiring people? Why do you need investors? You need these people on your team. You need to build a team. And to do that, I mean, they want to have someone who's confident, but somebody who is arrogant is not open. So you
Mm.
have to have an openness to feedback from investors. Sometimes I'll hear people who say, oh, I met with 10 different venture firms and they all told me that, I am unfocused, but I know best. Well, if 10 firms have told you that you're unfocused and you want some money to build something, I would listen to that consistent feedback. So I think in being confident about what you want to do, there also has to be a side of you that understands that you need other people to build the thing you want to build. And because of that, especially as you go, you're going to hire someone for marketing, you're going to hire someone for sales. You cannot be the best at everything. You may be the best at leading, you may be the best at knowing the vision. You may have the best idea of the products that you want, but you will not be the best across the board. And the quicker you realize that, and the
Mm.
more you will appreciate the people in those roles, and the more successful you will end up being because you understand what you're uniquely good at and what other people are uniquely good at. And you have the openness to be able to allow their expertise to inform how the company moves. I think that, and that's really where you get very, very kind of fast growth. I have no problem with confidence. I think arrogance ends up shutting people out and shutting people
Yeah.
down and turning people off. And so you'll just end up shooting yourself in the foot with that one.
Yes, very apt examples brought as well. And this kind of reminds me how you hold on to a certain opinion or you hold on to a certain thought, but have this
Yes.
loose thread of spaces around it, so you can just like incorporate other people's feedback into it. You just grow better only when like you bring into conjunction a lot of what others also bring to the table. And
Yeah.
this is where I guess like the ego also plays through, where you're like, oh well, like it's not something that I didn't know of, or just like you said, cutting people off, saying that you're just kind of repeating the same thing that I said, but not often like just judging that from the lens of what you already know, but just not looking at it from what they bring and like what newness that you can get from that. So I think yes, it's just very important that you incorporate people. You just don't like push them off, but just bring them onto the same radar that you are. So there's like more synergy and there's more things that you can do together.
Yeah, I think that, as a founder, a really good way of thinking about it sometimes is that if other people are giving you suggestions and it's always your way and it's never, like you have these experts around you, but you're never listening to them, that's a problem, right? Like, why are you hiring them? If you want people just to run tasks, you don't need
Yeah.
experts. Um, but, you have these people who have committed, their own careers to helping build this company that you're doing. There has to be a level both of appreciation, but also of using their scale so that you're kind of multiplying impact and you're kind of multiplying the quickness and pace in which your company can
Hmm.
go. If you are doing everything and making every decision, you will move a lot slower. So
Yeah.
it's, you're again, it's just it will become a stumbling block for yourself. So
Yeah.
kind of want to make sure that you're keeping that in check.
Yes, well said. And just going back to what we started this whole conversation with, which is like you help people stop themselves from getting in their own way. And I think we just like trying to get to the same point, which is like don't just impede yourselves because you're just shutting other people off from helping you take the journey that you
Right.
want to go towards. Yeah,
Absolutely.
like yeah, funny how like just comes back to that thought and like this is why most of us struggle through. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So here's like we've just come to the last question. I just can't imagine. Like we just discussed so many things across, and here am I asking you the last question for the conversation. Setting goals versus meeting, because we are just up into a new year, 2023 is just kicked in, and there are like people who just want to plan a lot of things, have a lot of goals to achieve. So how do you say somebody should look at it more from the ROI that they want to achieve from this year? So how should they prioritize things? What should they say no to? And how do they get the best ROI of themselves for this year?
All right. So I'm going to give your listeners a really an easy tip that they can use to make an adjustment. A lot of times what I hear from people is that they'll say, okay, we want to double our revenue, or we want to get, we want to reach a 7-figure revenue number, or whatever it happens to be. What I'll ask you to do is to make your goals hyper specific. And what I mean by that, I'll give you a really small example. If you say, oh, we want to double our revenue next year.
Mm.
Okay, if somebody out there is thinking about that, that sounds really good. But if I said, hey, I want to have a $9 million revenue next year, already you think, okay, how do I piece that together? What contracts do I need? What clients do I need, et cetera?
Mm.
You start to think in different ways. So instead
Right.
of just saying something vague, make your goals very, very hyper specific, because you'll start strategizing differently and it sets your
Mm.
mind tracking differently.
Mm.
So that's the way in which I would kind of think about your goals. I would make them hyper specific. And I would also have kind of this North Star. So what I mean by that is one thing that matters most that everyone else can kind of get behind and that you can get behind as well. So if it's that revenue number, every department in your startup could be thinking about that. Like, how does product help to reach that number? Oh, maybe it's around how many people they convert. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
Mm.
So having some really great metrics for yourself personally, I think that it's really important also to have some really specific things that you think about.
Mm.
And when you talk about not pursuing other things and how to say kind of no effectively, one of the things that I think about is you consider what your goals are and you filter everything else through that.
Mm.
So if you said, hey, my primary goal this year is I'm going to hit that 9 million revenue number, and all these opportunities come your way, or all these ideas come your way. Is it going to help you hit that number? If it's not, say no. And so it becomes very, very easy. I also think you have to know what your priorities are as a person, right?
Right.
For most people, if you're building a startup or you're a founder, you don't have time for a lot of hobbies. I mean, you have time for your self-care. Hopefully you're getting good sleep. That is probably one of the most important things you could be doing. It affects decision-making and other things. If you have any relationships or a family, you should be spending some time with them, probably very little, but still you want to spend time with them. And then, obviously you're spending time with your company. So really knowing your priorities, knowing your goals, and then filtering everything else around it. Is it going to give you what you need, this opportunity? If the answer is no, it could be really fantastic. But if it's not helping you reach your goals or
Mm.
kind of meeting one of your priorities, you have to ruthlessly kind of cut and say no about that.
Yeah. that by itself was very specific in terms of like just sticking to like 3 steps, which is go deep into that very specific point you want to go with your goal. And often I think that's why most of us end up making the larger picture there, like just say that, yeah, I just want to like close this deal, or just want to get this in revenue number, like just put forth, but don't go very deep into what of that you want to achieve. So that like gets your lens more closer when you get specific. So that, and like for me, the second thing that you mentioned, like bringing people onto the journey, for me, it was also about when you have the certain outlook into achieving that revenue, it's also like, how do you translate that in the language that somebody who joins you also gets this idea about, okay, so this person's working towards it. So this is how it helps me as well. So like that could get translated in a slightly different way. So let's say your marketing head or your PM or anybody who's joining you, but they are also in it with you because they look at it from a slightly different lens, but they also like join you because they are committed to the same journey as one. So I guess, yes, like getting this more specific is
Absolutely. And so, like, this is why when I have, like, there are frameworks to make sure that you function more effectively. And, you had talked about, we had mentioned briefly that I do writing in a newsletter. So if people want accessibility in those types of frameworks, I mean, that is what this newsletter is really all about. So, it's the ultra successful newsletter on Substack. I'm going to plug it. If you want to, subscribe, I hope that you get a lot of value from it. And we have more of these kinds of conversations just from experience in startups, experience with some of the most successful founders out there. And hopefully it gives scale and opportunity to kind of gain some of those impacts behind the curtain so you can use them for your own businesses as well.
definitely. And I'm just going to put that newsletter link in the show description and ensure that everybody gets to like subscribe to it. So yeah, thank you for adding that in. Yes, yeah, we just discussed a lot of things under the roof, like from getting specific goals to navigating through a lot of these confusions and trying to, clarify your own thoughts, be comfortable in your own skin. I guess it's just a lot of stories and a lot of good people's examples that we brought with. So thank you so much, Julie, for being here and for sharing some of your experiences, the ones that you go through with your clients as well, and like getting it out for the audience here. So yes, really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope that your audience really appreciates the amount of thought and effort that you put into really finding the questions that are relevant to people out there today. I think that we've discussed in the 40, 50 minutes, probably more insights than I've had on many interviews that I've had. So I truly appreciate the depth and the way that you consider the people out there. I hope they appreciate you. So have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for having me. And I wish all of your audience great success.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, wishing you the same success back as well. Have a great year ahead. Thanks to you.